Welcome back to Rugby from the Stands. South Africa beat Scotland 42-28 at Loftus, and at first glance, that probably sounds like a pretty normal Springbok home win. 6 tries, big physical moments, scoreboard gets away late. But honestly, when I went through the numbers, this became one of the stranger games that I have looked at, because Scotland did so many things that normally point towards either winning or at least having the opponent under serious stress. They had 64% possession. They won territory 60-40. They had more carries, more post-contact meters, more line breaks, quicker ball. And for long stretches, they looked like the team asking the harder attacking questions. And they still lost by 14 without leading for a single minute in this game. So it begs the question, how could Scotland possibly win that much rugby and still end up losing by 14? Now, I don't want to make this sound like South Africa suddenly discovered attacking rugby, because across this whole series, we've already seen that try scoring is up year over year. Attacking rugby is back. And for the Boks, with Tony Brown in the setup, who is arguably the best attack coach in the world, they are very, very comfortable attacking you. Every point had to come from actually converting pressure into tries. And in that kind of game, which this was, South Africa were just miles more efficient than Scotland. The momentum chart is brutal. South Africa go 14-0 up after 19 minutes from Papier and Roos. Scotland then fight all the way back to 14-all by halftime through Matt Ferguson and Kyle Rowe. So if you're Scottish at the break, you're thinking, okay, we took the punch, we got back up, and now there's a proper game here. And for us neutrals, this was an exciting prospect. Then Dixon gets yellow carded right on 40 minutes, and Scotland score 0 points with the extra man. That is the part that, if you're a Scottish fan, probably stings the most. And that's the mad bit for me. Scotland had dragged themselves level by halftime. They had 10 minutes against 14 men, and they still never managed to get their noses in front. Then South Africa hit them with 21 points in about 9 minutes. Lowe, Willemse, Porthen. Scotland came back again. They get it to 35-28, but Jesse Kriel finishes it late. And the thing is, Scotland's attack was genuinely firing. Let's look at the attack shape chart. The bottom axis is post-contact meters per ruck, and the side axis is the line breaks per 100 rucks. Both teams are in that complete attack corner. South Africa and Scotland both had 4.6 post-contact meters per ruck. Exactly the same. And this is why I do normalize it for per ruck, because if you saw the possession stats, Scotland obviously had more of the possession. So normalizing it to per ruck stats or per phase stats gives us a better indication of the real impact of the carries. So on this chart, South Africa and Scotland both had 4.6 post-contact meters per ruck. Exactly the same. Scotland actually edged the line breaks, 9.9 per 100 rucks to South Africa's 8.5. For context, in the New Zealand-Italy game, both teams were around 3.1 post-contact meters per ruck. This one was 4.6 each, so the collision level was just completely different. So I don't think this game was decided by who could create danger, but it was decided by who turned opportunity into points. And that is where the attacking execution chart basically explains the result. South Africa had 8 visits to the Scotland 22 and averaged 5.2 points per visit. That is ridiculous. South Africa are clearly making this a habit of hitting 5 points and above per visit this entire series. Granted, it's only been 2 games, but 2 out of 2 above 5 points per visit is scary. Scotland had 11 visits, so more chances than the Boks, and finished at 2.5 points per visit. So basically right around the test match median. So if I'm being totally fair, and Scottish fans, you'd probably find it hard to disagree with me, Scotland were absolutely brave between the 22s, but pretty average inside South Africa's 22. South Africa were living off fewer chances, but when they did make it into Scotland's 22, they almost always converted those entries into points. The kicking chart shows how different the two approaches were. Scotland kicked only 13.2 times per 100 rucks and still won territory 60-40. So if you're an All Blacks fan, that's probably good news because you don't have to kick to gain territory. Scotland somehow managed to play in the right side of the pitch, even with fewer kicks. So that is territory without kicking. They were carrying themselves downfield, winning collisions and keeping the ball alive. South Africa's kicking was a bit more mixed. Some of it was exit work from Fassi, but a lot of it was contestable kicking as well. And Papier had a few kicks off the base that didn't really buy huge distance. Their kicking strategy was more like they were happy to kick into contests, absorb the messy parts of the game, and back themselves to punish Scotland when the field position finally came. Then the collision and tempo chart makes the Scotland frustration even bigger. Scotland had 3.6 post-contact meters per carry and recycled 71% of their rucks inside 3 seconds. South Africa were at 3.2 and 61%. So, Scotland won the collision battle, won the ruck speed battle, won possession, won territory, and lost by 14. At that point, you have to ask where the ball was actually lost. And the answer was not really the breakdown. South Africa won 3 turnovers. Scotland won 2, both below the test median of 5. So this was not some giant jackal battle at the breakdown. There was no constant flow pressure taking the game away from Scotland. The tackling picture is interesting as well. South Africa made 198 tackles and missed 46. That is 81% tackle completion rate. Pollard missed 7 on his own. Now, again, with South Africa, I don't want to treat 46 missed tackles like a simple defensive failure because in a blitz or hybrid system, some misses are almost baked into the system. It's a feature, not a bug of the blitz defense system. You shoot, you pressure the pass, you force quicker decisions, and sometimes that means the first tackler does not stick. The concern is not just the miscount, but the concern is what Scotland got after those moments. They got 12 line breaks, 562 post-contact meters, and a lot of quick ball. Scotland made 126 tackles, they missed 21 and finished at 86%, which is relatively much cleaner. So Scotland also had a pretty blitz-esque defense as well. And let's get to that in the blitz or drift chart later. So I really don't buy into the argument that having a very low tackle completion rate is always a feature. There are teams that do employ the blitz but also have a relatively cleaner completion rate. And Scotland is one of them. But Scotland had 0 dominant tackles from 126 attempts. South Africa only had 4. So Scotland's system looked tidy, but the contact edge was still South African. Some of you in the comments have challenged the fact that dominant hits aren't really important and it's a vanity metric unless it leads to a positive outcome, and I totally agree with you, but it does shift the momentum. For my All Blacks fans who are watching, I want you to recall the World Cup quarterfinals, Ireland versus the All Blacks. The Irish in that last play of the game were actually building momentum and they were gaining ground. We were allowing them ground, but we managed to hold our defensive line. And you might notice there was one guy in particular who had an incredible work rate right at the death, Anton Leonard-Brown, someone that All Blacks fans don't really rate very highly. But there was one point where he ran across the pitch to hit one of the Irish attackers with a dominant tackle, completely changing the attack shape and disrupting Ireland's flow. And 3 phases later, Sam Whitelock jackals the ball for the penalty, winning us the game. Those unseen moments are why dominant tackles are so useful, right? And also, when you're playing against a team that does hit you hard, it's not fun. You play differently, you think differently, you go to contact differently. So there is a psychological edge to it as well. So Scotland's system looked tidy, but the contact edge was still very South Africa dominant. The new defense system chart make that even more interesting. Scotland's line speed number was wild. 0.68 opposition passes per tackle. When the test norm across 440 test matches, the median number is 1.09. That means by this metric, they were shutting the ball down before South Africa could move it. But this is where the numbers and the eye test are quite interesting, because when I was watching it live, It definitely felt like South Africa were the team putting Scotland under more pressure. Part of that is the metric itself. Scotland's number is probably shaped by South Africa throwing only 85 passes and having far less ball. So yes, Scotland were aggressive, but the number also gets pulled to an extreme because the Boks just did not pass that much. South Africa, meanwhile, defended far more Scottish pressure, and Scotland still managed to get 233 passes away. So the chart says one thing, but the eye test adds a bit more context. And Scotland did back their line speed up with 86% tackle completion. So Scotland were aggressive at the breakdown and were accurate. South Africa, by comparison, were at 1.2 opposition passes per tackle and 81% completion, which looks poor if you just read it cold. But having said that, Handre Pollard, after the game, also talked about their leaky defense, and the defense didn't hold, and I think these numbers kind of point to that as well. Scotland still conceded 8.45 line breaks per 100 South African rucks. South Africa conceded 9.92. That's nearly 10 line breaks per 100 Scottish rucks. So in this game, South Africa were even leakier. So looking at this chart, neither defense really held. It was obviously more attack rather than defense. Scotland's line speed was impressive, but when South Africa got through it, they got through badly. South Africa leaked more, but Scotland did not punish those leaks at the same rate. Surprisingly, the set piece and discipline were not the difference maker either. Scotland had a 90.3% total set piece win rate with 10 penalties conceded. South Africa were at 88.5 with 9 penalties conceded. Scotland went 2 from 2 at scrum time and 92% at the line out. That's not a bad day at the office. Nobody completely sabotaged the foundation for both teams. The turnover spill is where Scotland really hurt themselves. South Africa lost 7 turnovers and won 3. So net -4. Scotland lost 10 and won 2. So net -8. By test standards, 10 lost is not actually disastrous because the median is 14. But against the world champions in this game, where almost nobody was stealing ball, every error was going to be expensive. And Scotland lost 10 turnovers, while only 3 of them were forced. 7 of those turnovers were unforced. For Scotland, those errors were painful. Ashman had 3. Steyn had 3. You have the Steyn kick pass that he couldn't hold on to, and the Dempsey knock-on near the line. Too many of those happened after Scotland had done so well to get into the scoring positions. They created opportunities, but they just weren't ruthless in finishing those opportunities. South Africa had 5 unforced errors as well. Fassi with 2. So they weren't spotless, but a lot of their errors happened in the middle of the pitch. Scotland's errors came with points available at arm's reach, against a team averaging 5.2 every time it reached your 22. So you cannot afford to miss those opportunities, which Scotland unfortunately did. The geography chart is almost funny in a painful way. I'm sorry, Scotland fans. South Africa spent 44% of their own possession inside their own 22, 65% inside their own half, and only 8% inside Scotland's 22. And they scored 42 points. Make that make sense. That is scary. Scotland had 11 entries, but only 3% of their possession actually lived inside the South African 22. So the story basically is, they got there, they did everything right to get there, but they did not stay there. It was in, out, error, exit, reset. If you're a Scottish fan, you must have been really frustrated. South Africa led for 48 minutes of the game, and Scotland led for none. The player charts add a little bit more texture to that as well. Cobus Wiese is almost off the carrier chart. 9.5 meters per carry from the bench. 4 carries for 38 meters. Tom Jordan beat a defender on all 4 of his carries in 13 minutes, which is a mad little cameo. And Steyn sums up Scotland's night. 7 defenders beaten, which was insane. That was the most in the game, but 3 turnovers as well. dangerous and loose at the same time. Tuipulotu, I felt so bad for him because he had an incredible game. He carried 14 times for 72 meters and 6 defenders beaten. Kriel was a standout as well, going at 7.4 meters per carry. And Nortje gave South Africa 5.9 meters per carry as a lock, which is insane seeing that giraffe on the loose. On the enforcer map, the backbench forwards clearly stand out. Roos at 28 tackles per 80, Porthen 26, Wessels 24, and these are all normalized for 80 minutes by the way. Nortje's 23 tackles across the full game is probably the raw defensive shift of the entire match. And where you see grey dots on these player charts, that just means that both teams share the same spot. The Jackal chart is probably the quietest one we have had. Grobala is the only player who both won one and gave one away. The big group sitting on 1 penalty and 0 steals confirms the wider point. There was no breakdown war to win. Grant Williams is the story of the creator chart. 2 try assists in 36 minutes, or 4.4 per 80. And again, the scary thing with this box side is that they can look like they're under pressure for long stretches, and then one bench player can change the speed of the whole game. Pollard had a try assist and kicked perfectly. The finisher list is full of forwards. Lowe, Roos, Porthen, Bayliss, Ferguson. 5 of the 10 tries came from forwards, and 3 of those came from loose forwards. For Scotland, Cummings and Tuipulotu were the only credited creators. 1 each. Nobody in blue created twice. Russell kicked 4 from 4, had a decent running threat number but 0 try assists. By his standards, he had a very quiet creative night. Aphelele Fassi's playmaker bubble is basically the South African plan in 1 dot. 6 kicks, almost no running threat, and pure exit duty. And then Pieter-Steph du Toit stands alone on the two-way contact chart. 19 tackles, a dominant hit, and 7 carries. Wiese is the attacking extreme. Nortje and Kriel show up well on the carry side, but Pieter-Steph is the one doing both jobs with real edge. So when I put the whole thing together, this is where I land. Scotland won possession, territory, carries, post-contact meters, line breaks, collisions, and ruck speed. They had 157 carries to South Africa's 102. They had 562 post-contact meters to 329. They had 12 line breaks to 6. And they lost by 14. For me, 3 numbers explain it. 5.2 points per 22 visit against 2.5. 7 unforced Scottish turnovers in a game where almost nothing was being stolen. And 0 points during the Dixon yellow card window. So yes, Scotland were brave. They created opportunities, they looked dangerous at times, and they asked South Africa loads of questions. But if you win that much of the middle of the field and never lead, I think wasteful has to come into the conversation. From a South African standpoint, I think New Zealand will be watching this one very closely because Scotland play in some ways quite a similar game to New Zealand's. They want tempo, they want movement, they want to stretch you and keep asking questions. The difference is New Zealand are usually far more ruthless once they get into your 22. So both games were actually useful for both South Africa and New Zealand. They both played teams over the weekend that stressed them from different ways. New Zealand against Italy, who are much more forward dominant, much more tighter than them. And South Africa against Scotland. Again, Scotland love to play, love to pass, love to get to the edge. So this was a good training ground for both sides. They both had slightly weaker round 2 teams as well. And they both walked away with work-ons. So let me know what you saw. Scotland won nearly everything except the scoreboard. Is that brave, wasteful, unlucky, or just the Springboks doing Springbok things? And is there any defense in this tournament that can actually hold the Boks under 5 points of visit? As usual, if you like this analysis, please do like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. It massively helps the channel, and honestly, massive thank you to everyone who comments, contributes insights, adds context and feedback, and even challenges some of the data. It really does help refine and sharpen the analysis. I will see you in the next round.